Eve Wilkowitz was a 20-year-old woman who was born and raised in Oakdale, Suffolk County, in New York. Eve had a younger sister, Irene Wilkowitz, whom she was very close with. Her family and friends described her as a vibrant, loving, and charming woman. In 1976, her mother passed away from breast cancer, which affected her and her sisters deeply. In 1980, Eve moved to Bayshore, New York, in order to be closer to her job. She worked as a secretary at Macmillan Publishing in Manhattan, New York City. In February 1980, she met Jack Dempsey, who was an aspiring writer. They would soon start dating. On the evening of March 21st, 1980, Eve went out to watch a movie with Jack. They returned to Jack's apartment sometime before midnight. Eve was extremely tired, so she decided to take a quick nap and asked her boyfriend to wake her up in time to catch the last Long Island Railroad train home. Her boyfriend asked her to stay the night, but Eve insisted that she needed to go back to her apartment, as she needed to take care of some personal work the next day. Jack woke her up and dropped her off at Penn Station in Manhattan. Eve took the last railroad train back to her home in Bayshore. However, she never made it back to her home. 3 days later, on March 25, 1980, a woman discovered Eve's body near the train station in Bayshore. An autopsy revealed that she had been bound, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death with a rope. Police believed that she had been held captive for 3 days before she was killed. Her body had been dumped in the backyard of a house not far from her own home. Her shoes, pocketbook, and coat were missing. The police interviewed family and friends. Her boyfriend was suspected, but was quickly ruled out. Police questioned people around the crime scene, but no one had noticed anything suspicious. Police were able to collect DNA samples from the crime scene, and over the years the DNA was uploaded to various DNA databases, but no matches could be found. With no leads and no suspects, the case would eventually go cold. For years, Eve's younger sister, Irene Wilkowitz, had become the last advocate for Eve after her father died in 2010. Irene would regularly contact the detectives, hoping to keep the case alive and trying to find any updates. Then, in 2018, Irene's son learned about the new investigative technique, genetic genealogy, used to catch the Golden State Killer. However, as the technique used private genealogy databases in order to find familial connections to identify the suspect, the technique had raised concerns for many due to the misuse of people's personal data. As a result, some states did not allow its use. In January of 2019, Irene contacted police and asked them to use the technique in her sister's case, but was told that New York did not allow the use of this technique. But investigators were able to find a workaround. The FBI had investigated the case in 1980 and were under no such restrictions. The detectives sent the DNA from the semen sample collected from the crime scene to the FBI, and in July of 2021, with the help of genetic genealogy, they were able to find a distant relative. Soon, they narrowed it down to one suspect, Herbert Rice. However, they could not question him as he had already died. He had died in 1991 from cancer. Detectives then tracked down his son, who voluntarily gave a DNA sample. Detectives soon confirmed that Herbert Rice had been the killer. At the time of the murder, Herbert had lived close to the crime scene. His ex-wife told detectives that, at the time of the murder, she had kicked Rice out of their marital home, and he had been living at his mother's house, which was a few houses away from the crime scene. At the time, Rice had 3 prior convictions for minor crimes, which did not require him to provide a DNA sample to be entered into the database. In March of 2022, investigators exhumed Rice's body and took a DNA sample, which was conclusively confirmed to be a match to the semen taken from the crime scene 42 years prior. The case was solved after almost half a century. Lisa Fracassi was a 37-year-old woman living at Waikiki apartment along 415 Naua Street, Honolulu, Hawaii. In 1994, she was working as an exotic dancer at a club called Exotic Paradise in order to save money for nursing school so that she could become a nurse. On October 30th, 1994, Lesia went to work and returned home at around 2 a.m. on October 31st. This would be the last time she was seen alive. Lesia was supposed to work on November 2nd, but she never showed up. Her boss called her apartment, but nobody answered. Then, on November 3rd, 1994, a maid who worked at the service department went inside her room to deliver fresh towels. She knocked on the door, but nobody answered, so she decided to enter the room. There had been a Do Not Disturb sign on the front door, but it had been there since October 31st. Upon entering the room, the maid discovered the body of Lesia. She had been strangled to death with a phone cord. Her mouth had been stuffed with a bedsheet. Police discovered a cigarette butt and a condom in her room. The coroner determined that she had been dead for at least 3 days. It is believed that Lesia was killed on the 31st of October, Halloween. There was no sign of forced entry into her apartment. Police interviewed neighbors and friends, but no one reported anything suspicious. Her ex-boyfriend, whom Lesia had broken up with a few weeks prior, was considered a suspect, but he was quickly cleared. The police had no suspects or clues, and the case would eventually go cold. The police did find DNA evidence at the crime scene, which was preserved in hopes that advancements in DNA technology could help them find the killer. In 2020, the Honolulu Police Department reopened the case and sent the DNA sample from the condom and the fingerprint from the cigarette butt to Parabon Nano Labs. Using genetic genealogy, genealogist C.C. Moore was able to find a potential relative of the suspect, and in 2022, she identified Cecil Trent as a potential suspect. Trent, however, had died in 2013 from congestive heart failure at the age of 48. Police then matched the fingerprints found at the crime scene to the fingerprint record taken from Cecil Trent after his death, and it was a perfect match. Trent was 29 years old at the time of the murder and was never considered a suspect in the case. Even though Trent was not able to be charged, the case was considered solved after 28 years.
Gunsalus Rotatori was a 32-year-old woman living with her husband in Utica, Michigan. Lee was the oldest of 4 siblings and grew up on the outskirts of Rochester, Minnesota. Her siblings described her as a happy, outgoing woman, artistic, with many friends. Growing up, she loved drawing horses, and she fulfilled her dream of owning one while living in Michigan. Lee attended the University of Wisconsin, getting her bachelor's degree in dietary services and a master's degree in food nutrition. Lee married her first husband while she was an undergraduate and had a child with him in 1970. The couple got divorced in Rockford, Illinois in 1977. In 1978, Lee would marry Gerald, also known as Jerry, Nimke. They would get a divorce in 1979, but would remarry in 1981. Jerry had a history of crime. Years prior, when he was only 17 years old, he was arrested and convicted for beating a local waitress to death in 1960 in Chicago. He was tried and sentenced to death for the murder. However, the Supreme Court overturned his conviction less than 2 years later, as the preliminary hearing in the case was not conducted properly. Jerry eventually was sentenced to 75 years in prison in the second trial. However, due to prosecutorial bureaucracy, he was ultimately released in 1978. And upon his early release, he would meet his future wife, Lee Rotatori. In mid-June of 1982, Lee got a job offer as a food service director at Jenny Edmondson Hospital. While she was currently working in Utica, Michigan, she accepted the offer and moved to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Her husband, Jerry, was working as a part-time delivery man for a flower shop in Grand Haven, Michigan. He was supposed to move to Council Bluffs, Iowa once Lee got settled in. Lee arrived to Council Bluffs in mid-June and started her orientation for her new job on June 21st. She was new to the area and did not have permanent housing, staying at the Best Western Frontier Motor Lodge, now known as the Best Western Crossroads of the Bluffs. She was located just off of the I-29 and I-80 interchange. On June 24th, Lee went boating on Lake Manawa with her new colleagues. Evening came, and she stopped at McDonald's to pick up dinner before heading back to her motel. This would be the last time that she was ever seen alive. The next day, Lee failed to attend her first post-orientation day of work. Later that day, her boss called the motel staff to check on Lee. A motel employee went to her room to talk to her and instead found a gruesome sight. Lee was found lying face up on the bed, wearing blood-soaked pajamas. The motel staff immediately notified police. The medical examiner would report that Lee had died from a single stab wound to the heart. She was also sexually assaulted. The investigators did not find any sign of a forced entry. The food that she had purchased from McDonald's was only enough for one person, so investigators surmised that she was not expecting any guests. The medical examiner stated that she likely died 12 hours before her body had been found. Robbery may have been a motive, as the victim's wallet, watch, and ring were missing, but the police were unsure. Investigators interviewed her family and friends. Given her husband's prior history, Jerry was suspected, but he was cleared after it was found that he had a rock-solid alibi. Due to the proximity of the motel to the highway's interchange, the police had a hard time narrowing down suspects, as the killer could have been anybody. Sergeant Larry Williams, the investigating officer, said that by the time her body was found, quote, the killer could have been 5 feet away or 1,000 miles away. The Jenny Edmondson Hospital, along with other local organizations, raised a $3,000 reward for anybody who could provide info in the case, but no one came forward. There would be no leads or suspects in the case, and it would eventually go cold. In 2001, the evidence from the crime scene was submitted to the State of Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations Lab in order to be examined. They found the presence of a male DNA profile. The DNA profile was entered into federal databases, but no match could be found. In 2019, investigators sent the DNA sample to Parabon Nano Labs. Parabon, using snapshot DNA phenotyping, was able to determine that the killer was most likely a white male of Northern European descent. They then entered the DNA profile into genealogy websites such as 23andMe and Ancestry.com. They were then able to find a match to a relative that was the 6th to 8th cousin of the suspect. Still, the chances of them finding out the suspect were slim to none. Then, in March of 2020, investigators were contacted by Eric Schubert, a volunteer genealogist and college student, who offered to help. Eric had already assisted police in several other cases in multiple states, and most recently had helped solve the murder of Marise Ann Chiverella. With Eric's assistance, investigators were able to narrow down the list to 2 brothers. One of the brothers was too young at the time of Lee's murder, which meant the other brother, Thomas O. Freeman, was likely the killer. Investigators contacted Freeman's daughter, who provided a DNA sample. In 2022, the investigators confirmed that Thomas O. Freeman was the killer. Thomas Freeman was a 35-year-old trucker at the time of Lee's murder. Police believe that Freeman had killed Lee while passing through the area. It was also found that Freeman was a victim of a murder himself just 2 months after Lee's murder. On October 30th, 1982, Freeman's decomposing body was found in a shallow grave not far from his home in Cobden, Illinois. He had been shot 4 times in the chest. The coroner determined that he was killed 2 to 3 months prior to his body being found. His case remains unsolved. While the investigating officer could not find a direct connection between Freeman and Lee, he later commented, quote, 2 months later, he dies a violent death. I'm not a real big believer in coincidences. The Council Bluffs Police Department are working with the Illinois State Police to see whether Freeman's murder is connected to Lee's murder. They're investigating if Lee's husband, Jerry, had anything to do with Freeman's murder. It was found that after Jerry got out of prison in 1978, he attended a college in Carbondale, Illinois, which was only 15 miles from where Freeman's body was later found. It is unclear if Jerry had anything to do with Freeman's murder, but he is considered a person of interest. Jerry, however, died in 2019. Lee Rotatori's case was finally solved after 40 years. Anna Jean Kane was a 26-year-old mother of 3 living in Birdsboro, Berks County, Pennsylvania. Anna grew up in a troubled home and was subject to both physical and sexual abuse, resulting in a subsequent drug addiction. By 1988, Anna was mother to 3 children and was working as a sex worker to provide for her family. The path she chose was a dangerous one, as prostitutes were at high risk back then and still today, and Anna was subjected to meet all types of dangerous men. She also had a history of arrests for prostitution and petty theft. Anna had just moved from Reading to Birdsboro, Pennsylvania. On October 22, 1988, she ate dinner with her children and told her daughter that she had to run to the store. This would be the last time her children would ever see her alive. It is believed that Anna left in search for a customer in Reading. She was last seen around Franklin Street and South 6th Street, Reading, Berks County, at approximately 1 a.m. on October 23, 1988. The following morning, a man walking alone found her body alongside Ontoloni Trail Road in a sparsely wooded area near the Route 662 intersection in Perry Township. She had baling twine around her neck, and an autopsy revealed that she had been beaten and strangled to death. She also had several bruises on her face, which the coroner believed was due to a struggle with the killer. The coroner believed that Anna had died just 12 hours prior to her body being found. The police noted that her clothes were not wet, even though it had rained the previous night, suggesting that she was killed somewhere else before being dumped. Police collected DNA evidence from Anna's clothing, but nothing else would be found at the crime scene which could lead them to the killer. 2 years later, the Reading Eagle, a local newspaper, published a front-page story seeking information about Anna's death. In February of 1990, the newspaper received an anonymous letter from a, quote, concerned citizen. The letter contained information which had not been made public and only a killer would have known about. The letter writer had left his DNA when he licked the envelope, so police were able to collect the DNA from the envelope seal and test it against the DNA found on Anna's clothing. As suspected by police, it was a match, meaning whoever had written the letter was likely the killer. Despite this, police were unable to determine the identity of the killer, as DNA technology was still in its infancy. In 1998, the DNA sample was entered into CODIS, but no matches could be found. With no leads or suspects, the case would eventually become cold. Then, in 2022, Pennsylvania State Police sent the DNA sample that they had obtained to Parabon Nano Labs for genetic genealogy testing. They soon identified a local man named Scott Grimm as the potential suspect. However, he could not be brought to justice as it was found that he was already dead. Unlike his victim, he had the blessing of having died from natural causes. Police obtained DNA from Grimm posthumously and matched it with DNA found at the crime scene, as well as the DNA found on the envelope. It was a perfect match. Investigators did not reveal how they specifically got the sample of Grimm's DNA. Police have not revealed much information about Grimm's life to the general public. Grimm had lived in Reading, but had moved to Birdsboro shortly before the murder. Grimm remained a resident of southeast Pennsylvania until his death. He did not have any prior criminal history, except for an arrest in 2002 for harassing a former business partner. However, during that arrest, his DNA was not entered into police database. He was 58 at the time of his death. Anna's daughter, Tamika Reyes, was relieved to find some form of closure. However, she was disappointed to learn that Grimm died without facing justice. The case was officially solved after 34 years. Anita Knutson was an 18-year-old girl living with her roommate in Minot, North Dakota. Anita was one of 3 children adopted by Gordon and Sharon Knutson. She was very close to her family and would often keep in touch with her mother. Her sister, Anna, described her as a wonderful girl, caring and kind. In 2007, Anita moved to Minot, North Dakota from her home in Butte, North Dakota, in order to attend Minot State University. Anita was living off campus with a roommate named Nicole Rice. She was working 2 jobs while also studying to become a teacher. On June 2nd, 2007, Anita's mother, Sharon, tried calling Anita, but she did not pick up the phone. It was unlike Anita to not answer her phone calls. She would always talk to her mother. After not hearing from Anita on Saturday, June 2nd, her mother tried contacting her the next day, but was unsuccessful. Worried, she asked her husband to drive to Minot to check up on her. On June 4th, 2007, her father, Gordon, stopped by Anita's apartment. Her car was outside the apartment. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. He tried opening the door, but it was locked. Gordon then asked the manager and the janitor to unlock the door. However, the manager at first refused, as they simply could not just allow family into a room without Anita's permission. The janitor then recalled that the window screen to Anita's bedroom was slashed and left outside. Gordon peered in through the window and saw Anita lying on her bed, close enough to touch. As he reached for her face, he realized that her body was cold. The manager opened the front door and Gordon made the horrible discovery. Anita was in her bedroom, dead. The mattress and the floor were stained with blood. They immediately notified the police. Anita had been stabbed multiple times, with a robe covering her bloody body. An autopsy revealed that she had been dead for more than a day before her body was found. A pocket knife with dried blood on it was found in the bed. Anita was not sexually assaulted, and there was no sign of robbery. Nothing in the house had been taken or disturbed. There were no scuff marks or shoe prints. No evidence that anyone had entered through or out of the window. Although the screen had been slashed and set aside, police do not believe that the window was used to enter the room. Police interviewed family and friends. They also interviewed Anita's roommate, who told them that she had been at her family's farm south of Velva when Anita was murdered. According to police, statements from her and her family had been inconsistent. It was found that Rice and Anita did not get along and had multiple fights, which turned into physical confrontations. Anita had been planning to move out. Rice was described by others as hot-tempered and reactionary. One witness had reportedly told police that Rice had been in a club in Russo, North Dakota, the night before Anita's murder. Russo is about 40 miles away from Minot. Rice reportedly stayed until early morning and then left to go to Minot to get clothes. Police, however, did not have enough evidence to charge her, and the case would eventually grow cold. Rice remained a person of interest in the case, however. In 2013, another tragedy struck the Knutson family. Anita and Anna's brother, Daniel, had taken his own life. Anita's sister, Anna, reflects, quote, "What haunts me most about the death of my sister is that whoever killed her also took the life of my brother that very day. After she was killed, he was never the same." In 2022, investigators started reinvestigating the case. They re-interviewed family and friends. Soon, Rice's ex-boyfriend told police that one night, Rice had gotten, quote, belligerently drunk in 2008 or 2009 and had said that she had killed Anita. On Wednesday, March 16, 2022, the police held a press conference. They announced that they had arrested Anita's roommate, Nicole Rice. Police Chief John Klug said, quote, "Although most of the detectives who worked on the original scene and investigation have retired, we have not forgotten about this case." He continued, "I wish we could have solved this sooner, but at the same time, I'm glad to say that we have the person responsible for the murder of Anita Knutson." No other details surrounding the case were included in the press conference. On March 16th, Rice was charged with a double-A felony murder and taken to Ward County Jail. Rice made a video appearance the next day, and her bail was set to $120,000. Later that day, she posted her bail. Rice is scheduled to appear for a pretrial conference on November 16th. No trial dates have been set as of yet. Nicole Rice has pled not guilty to the murder charge and awaits further judgment. On July 15, 1982, a gravedigger named George Keiss was walking through the Cider Ridge Cemetery
off of State Highway 84 in Blairstown, Warren County, New Jersey. He made his way toward the rear end of the cemetery, located in a wooded area, just over a steep bank which led down to a creek below. That's when the gravedigger noticed something in the grass. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the shape was actually a body, that of a young woman. He immediately notified police. The woman had been found lying on her back, partially clothed. Her face had been bludgeoned beyond recognition, and her body had started the process of decomposition. An autopsy revealed that she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. However, medical examiners could not determine the weapon that was used. Due to the level of decomposition, initially, authorities believed that the woman had died 2 weeks prior to her discovery. However, further examination would change the date to merely a few days prior to her discovery. The humidity in the area likely hastened the process. The medical examiner did not find any drugs in the woman's system, and due to the rate of decomposition, her blood had fermented, making it impossible to determine if she had alcohol in her system. The medical examiner was not able to determine if she had been sexually assaulted. Due to the state of her body, no semen could be found. The victim was wearing a red, short-sleeved shirt and had a peasant-style skirt with a peacock print at the bottom. The skirt was laying over her legs. She was not wearing any undergarments. A golden cross necklace was found tangled in her hair. The victim had put up a fight, as the coroner noted defensive wounds on her arms and hands. Investigators determined that the girl was between the ages of 14 and 18, standing 5 foot 2 inches tall and weighing around 110 pounds. Police could not determine her eye color as her face had been shattered. Police hoped that she would be identified by a concerned parent using the detail of her distinct skirt. However, she never was. She was eventually given the name Princess Doe and laid to rest in a cemetery on July 22, 1983. A composite sketch of the victim would also be released in the newspapers. Soon, a witness would come forward after seeing photos of the clothes of the victim. She told police that she had witnessed the victim in a local supermarket 2 days prior to her body being found. Another woman would confirm the sighting several days later. The woman recalled that the victim was wearing a bun and was described as having a stoic expression. The police questioned employees at the local supermarkets, but none of them remembered seeing the young woman. Police would then encounter another woman who told them that she had seen the victim a few days prior to her body being found. The witness, a motel employee, said that the girl had spoken to her when she checked into a room. The witness recalls the young woman asking if there were any jobs available, possibly as a house cleaner or a receptionist at the motel. The witness recalls that the young woman stated she was a runaway from Florida and was looking for a job. She also recalls the runaway mentioning that her father was a dentist. However, the witness could not remember the actual name of the victim. Over the years, police followed several leads, but to no avail. For many years, Princess Doe was believed to be Diane Janice Dye, a teenager who had disappeared from San Jose, California. In 2003, a DNA test of Princess Doe, utilizing Diane's mother's DNA, revealed that Princess Doe was in fact not Diane Dye. Over the years, several other missing women would also be ruled out. In 1999, police received a lead when Arthur and Donna Kinlaw confessed to murdering Princess Doe. Arthur and Donna had run a prostitution ring and had a history of crime, including robbery, forgery, welfare fraud, and murder. During questioning, Donna told investigators that her husband had murdered 3 girls, including the teenage girl found in the New Jersey cemetery. She said that in July of 1982, her husband had brought home a teenage girl to use for prostitution, but he claimed that she was actually not worth recruiting, as he found her inexperienced. Donna recalls that he tried to sell the young girl to other pimps in the area, but failed, and eventually he decided to murder the girl. Donna told investigators that she witnessed Arthur committing the murder in the cemetery. She stated that he then burned his clothes and cleaned his vehicle. He threatened Donna to not tell the police. Donna recalls that the victim was from New York, possibly Long Island. Initially, Arthur refused to talk to investigators, but in 2005, he confessed to murdering Princess Doe. However, neither Donna nor Arthur remembered her name. Donna helped investigators create a new composite sketch of the victim, which matched the Princess Doe composites drawn earlier. Arthur was eventually sentenced to life in prison for 2 separate murders, and Donna was convicted of manslaughter charges and released in 2003. However, Arthur was not charged for Princess Doe's murder, as they could not confirm the couple's claims, and no charges could be brought until the identity of Princess Doe could be uncovered. In 2021, investigators, with the help of Astria Forensics Lab and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, were able to extract DNA from degraded samples of Princess Doe's body, and they constructed a DNA profile based on it. The DNA profile was sent to Innovative Forensic Investigations, who used genetic genealogy techniques to build a family tree. In doing so, they found a potential candidate for Princess Doe. Investigators then went to West Babylon in New York and collected a DNA sample from a potential brother and sister of the victim. On April 29, 2022, Princess Doe was finally positively identified as 17-year-old Dawn Olanek. Her brother told police that Dawn's parents had been divorced and that she had been living with her mother and sister in the neighborhood of Bohemia on Long Island. It is unclear whether Dawn left her home of her own accord or if she was ordered to do so by her mother, as different sources give conflicting reports. Police believe that after she left her home, she ran into Arthur Kinlaw. Kinlaw tried to lure her into prostitution, but when she refused, he instead drove her to New Jersey and killed her. Arthur Kinlaw was officially charged with Dawn Olanek's murder, based on additional evidence and witness statements. Arthur Kinlaw remains in prison at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, New York. The case was finally solved after 40 years.
Lesia Michelle Jackson was a 12-year-old girl living with her parents and older brothers in Conroe, Texas. She studied at Washington Junior High and loved going to the lake. On September 7, 1979, Lesia went to Lake Wildwood off FM 1485 in Conroe with her brothers. She spent most of the day swimming and playing at the lake, her favorite pastime. Later, when her brothers decided to head back home, Lesia said she wanted to enjoy a few more moments and told them that she would follow right behind them. Lesia did eventually follow and was spotted walking alone on Creek Bend Street towards her home. This would be the last time that she was seen alive. When she did not arrive home, her family went looking for her, but could not find her anywhere. They eventually reported her missing to the police. A search was conducted for the missing girl and lasted throughout the night. The following day, her brother found her glasses. They were located at Creek Bend and Deep Forest intersection, a location within the subdivision. An extensive search for the 12-year-old girl continued for 6 days. Then, on September 13, 1979, 6 days after Lesia's disappearance, an oilfield worker found Lesia's body in a heavily wooded area along a pipeline off Exxon Road in Conroe. The area where her body was found was about 5 miles from where she was last seen. She had been found undressed. Her blue swimming suit and her shredded t-shirt were found at the crime scene. An autopsy revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and she had been strangled to death. Police found tire tracks at the crime scene that they believe was from the killer's vehicle. At the time of her disappearance, Lesia was wearing a gold butterfly necklace with a matching butterfly ring. While the necklace was found on her body, the ring was never located, and police postulate that the killer took the ring with him as a souvenir. Investigators hoped the ring would help link them to the killer. An extensive investigation into the 12-year-old's murder was launched. A few months later, police arrested a local Vietnam veteran suffering from PTSD after he confessed to the murder. However, he later retracted the confession, and as there was no evidence linking him to the crime, he was eventually released. Over the years, police followed several tips and interviewed multiple suspects, but no leads were derived, and the case would eventually grow cold. Then, in October of 2021, investigators used a new technology called MVAC in order to retrieve DNA from Lesia's clothing. The MVAC machine aggressively sprays a sterile solution onto the surface while simultaneously applying a vacuum pressure in order to collect the solution and whatever possible DNA material is present on the surface. The solution and the DNA material are then run through a filter or a microcentrifuge in order to separate the DNA. MVAC technology helps investigators collect far more DNA than the traditional wet swab method. The DNA that was collected was then entered into CODIS. And in April of 2022, the DNA found on Lesia's clothing matched somebody in the database, one Gerald Dwight Casey. Casey had lived in Conroe at the time of the murder. Authorities were set to charge Casey for the murder. However, a search would reveal that he was already dead. It was found that he had been executed by lethal injection on the 18th of April, 2002, for a murder that he had committed in 1989. In 1989, Casey and his accomplice, Carla Smith, attempted to raise money for a trip to Florida, so they decided to sell furniture to a man named Daryl Pennington. However, Daryl changed his mind and backed out of the deal. In response, Casey and Smith decided to steal Daryl's gun collection. Daryl lived with a roommate named Sonia Howell. On July 10, 1989, Casey entered Daryl's house and attempted to steal his gun collection. However, he encountered his roommate Sonia instead. Casey hit Sonia in the head with a telephone and then shot her multiple times. He was later caught and sentenced to death. On July 8, 2022, a blood sample taken from Casey in 1989 was conclusively and formally matched with the DNA found at the crime scene of Lesia's murder. Even though a suspect was not able to be tried, the case was finally considered solved after 43 years.
Lindy Sue Biechler was a 19-year-old newlywed woman living with her husband, Philip Douglas Biechler, on 104A Clouse Drive at the Spring Manor Apartments in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Lindy worked at a flower shop, while her husband, Philip, worked at a Hertz rent-a-car. He was also studying at Millersville University in Millersville. On December 5, 1975, Lindy worked a shift at her job at the flower shop and left her place of work at around 5:15 p.m. She stopped by her husband's workplace to pick up his paycheck. Lindy then went to the grocery store at John Herr's Village Market and arrived home at 7:15 p.m. to wait for her husband to return from work. Lindy's uncle and aunt had decided to visit her that evening in order to exchange dinner recipes. They arrived around 8:45 p.m. and found the apartment door unlocked. They opened the door and walked into the apartment, only to find a grisly sight. They discovered Lindy's lifeless body laying on her back near the living room. She had a knife sticking out of her neck, with a towel wrapped around the handle of the knife. They immediately notified police. The knife and the towel were taken from Lindy's home. An autopsy revealed that she had been stabbed 19 times with 2 different knives. The second knife was never found, and it is believed that the killer brought the knife with him and took it away after the murder. Lindy had sustained wounds to her neck, chest, and upper abdomen and back. The medical examiner's report detailed that she had also been sexually assaulted. There was no sign of a forced entry. Police found blood on the front door and the entranceway wall. They also found blood on the carpet. It is believed that Lindy fought her attacker fiercely. The killer did leave behind a large footprint, marked in blood, on the kitchen floor. None of the neighbors were at home at the time of the murder, so nobody saw or heard anything. A few weeks prior to her murder, Lindy had told her family and friends that she was being stalked. She said that she had felt that someone was following her
and that she had seen someone peeking through the glass sliding door of her apartment. Police believed that the killer was already in her apartment or followed her home when she was carrying her groceries in. The police questioned family and friends. Her husband Philip was a suspect, but he was ruled out after it was confirmed he had been at work at the time of the murder. Over 100 people were interviewed, but to no avail. There would be no progress in the case for over a year. Then, almost 1 year later, in December of 1976, her family found that her gravestone had been vandalized. The headstone had been sprayed with red paint. It had also been chipped and scraped at, possibly by a knife. A few weeks later, Manor Township Police received an anonymous letter that was marked urgent. The letter claimed responsibility for both Lindy's murder and vandalizing her gravestone. The writer requested the letter be published in a newspaper, but police considered it a hoax and decided against it. Over the years, police interviewed several suspects, but none were ever charged. In 1997, Lancaster County District Attorney's Office sent a semen sample collected from Lindy's underwear in order for a male DNA profile to be created. In the year 2000, the DNA was entered into CODIS, but no match could be found. Then, in 2019, the District Attorney's Office sent the male DNA profile to Parabon Nano Labs, and they created a composite sketch of Lindy's killer. In 2020, genealogist C.C. Moore, using DNA, was able to create a family tree of a potential suspect. The suspect was of Mediterranean descent, possibly Italian. C.C. Moore found that the suspect had, quote, deep roots in the local Lancaster community. She also found that this potential suspect's family tree included numerous recent immigrant families from the tiny town of Gasparina, Italy. Eventually, they were able to pin down a suspect, David Sinopoli. Upon investigation, they found that Sinopoli had lived in the same apartment complex as Lindy. However, they still needed to confirm that he was the actual suspect, so they decided to surveil him. On February 11, 2022, investigators followed Sinopoli and his wife to the Philadelphia International Airport. Police watched as Sinopoli drank his coffee while waiting to catch his flight. He eventually threw his coffee cup in the trash can, and investigators were able to collect it. The DNA found on Sinopoli's coffee cup was then matched against DNA collected from Lindy's underwear. It was a perfect match. Investigators also learned of 2 spots of blood that were found on Lindy, which were of an unknown male's DNA. They compared it against the DNA from Sinopoli and confirmed that David Sinopoli was the killer. Police had always believed that the killer had cut himself during the knife attack. David Vincent Sinopoli, 68, was finally arrested and charged with 1 count of criminal homicide. Sinopoli was a former pressman at a commercial printing company. He would often go vacationing in Italy. At the time of Lindy's murder, he was married and had 2 children. He would later divorce his wife in 1986. He would marry his second wife in 1987. In 2004, Sinopoli had gotten a year-long probation for invasion of privacy and disorderly conduct after he was caught spying on a naked woman at a hair salon owned by his wife while they were getting a tan. He had no other criminal arrests and therefore was let go. Currently, he is being held in Lancaster County Prison with bail, awaiting trial. The case was finally solved after 47 years. Asenath Dukat was an 8-year-old girl living with her parents in Upper Arlington, Ohio. She was a 3rd grader at Barrington Elementary School. Nicknamed Sini, she was described as friendly but shy by her friends and family. Asenath was looking forward to summer vacation, which was only a week away. On June 3, 1980, Asenath, along with her class, were held 10 minutes after school in order to discipline the students for talking during a lesson. At around 3:10 p.m., Asenath left her school alone to walk to her home, which was about 1 mile away. Asenath had walked this route many times. She would walk from Barrington Road to Waltham Road and then turn towards Malvern Road. She was last seen by her 2 classmates walking at 3:20 p.m. on Waltham Road. She never arrived home. When she failed to arrive back at her house, her parents contacted Asenath's teacher, but her teacher said that she'd left school about an hour prior. Her parents knew something was wrong and immediately notified police at around 4:30 p.m. A widespread search ensued for the missing girl. At approximately 7:30 p.m. the same night, a police officer found her body in a drainage ditch near the corner of Riverside Drive and Waltham Road, just a block away from her home. She had been strangled, killed by blunt force trauma to the head by a 20-pound rock found at the crime scene. An autopsy later revealed that she had been sexually assaulted. Less than a month before Asenath's death, on May 7, 1980, at around 3:30 p.m., another girl from Tremont Elementary School was attacked while walking home from school. The girl was walking with her classmate when they were followed by a man on a red bicycle. The girls would eventually split up, and while cutting through a yard to reach Riverside Drive, the victim was grabbed from behind. When she tried to scream, the man choked her and left her unconscious. The attacker then fled the scene for unknown reasons. Her clothing had been disturbed when she regained consciousness, and that she had been moved several feet away from the scene of the attack to a more secluded area. The victim did not see the face of the attacker, as she was attacked from behind. A witness described the man on the red bike to be between the ages of 15 and 20 years old, thin, with straight black hair and an olive complexion. The red 10-speed bicycle that the would-be killer had ridden had no fenders and 3 reflectors, an orange one on the front wheel, a red one on the rear wheel, and another hanging from the back seat. Police believe that the same man who was responsible for Asenath's murder was responsible for the prior attack, as they both occurred at the same time of day and in the same area, and both attacks were sexually motivated. During their questioning, a witness reported to have seen a clean-cut man in a white t-shirt carrying a large object in both hands on the day that Asenath was murdered. The witness also reported to have seen a red bicycle parked nearby. Another witness helped police make a composite sketch of the killer. Despite this, no leads could be found. On that day, the weather was sunny and warm, and while many people were out and about, no one saw anything. Asenath was killed in an open area next to First Community Village, a retirement home for the elderly, but they did not see or hear anything either. Based on this, police theorized that Asenath was abducted and taken someplace else, raped and killed, and then dumped in the ditch. Over the years, police would receive several tips and would interview hundreds of suspects, but to no avail. The case would eventually grow cold. Asenath's murder led to the creation of a community-based group, The Long Walk Home, the Asenath Dukat Project, consisting of local kids who remembered Asenath's murder. The group regularly personally investigated Asenath's case and helped police in solving it. On August 11, 2022, the Upper Arlington Police Division announced that they had finally solved the case. They named Brent L. Strutner as the person responsible for Asenath's murder. Strutner was 20 years old at the time of Asenath's murder and lived locally. He graduated from Upper Arlington High School in 1979. He would go on to commit suicide in Columbus, Ohio, when he was 24 years old in 1984. Investigators say Strutner had been a suspect in the case for quite a while, but they did not have sufficient evidence to name him. In 2008, police sent DNA found at the crime scene for DNA testing at the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Soon, the DNA profile created proved to match Brent Strutner. However, even though police had linked Strutner to the crime more than a decade prior, they did not want to release information until they were absolutely sure. Police Sergeant Brian McKean said, quote, "We wanted to make sure all the pieces and parts were tied together before we released anything. Strutner was a suspect long before we had the ability to identify him." Detectives re-examined all the evidence in the case and tried to figure out if Strutner had acted alone or if he had an accomplice. One of Strutner's associates, Robert, also known as Chris Winchester, had been attacking young women in Columbus and the Ohio State University area at the time of Asenath's murder, including an attempted abduction of a young girl on Henderson Road, only months after the murder. Winchester was later found guilty and served prison time for that particular crime on Henderson Road. Winchester was investigated for Asenath's murder, but the police could not find sufficient evidence to link him to the crime. Police have re-examined every piece of evidence found at the crime scene, but no additional physical artifacts suggested that another person was involved. The case was closed after 42 years. However, members of the group The Long Walk Home believe that the case is far from closed. The advocacy group released a statement on the state of the case and its developments. Quote, "We applaud the countless hours and hard work that led to the confirmation of Brett Strutner's involvement in the crime. However, after viewing the totality of the evidence, it is reasonable to conclude Brett Strutner did not act alone. Our mission will continue based on that belief, and as long as the Dukat family and our community continue to support our efforts to bring all involved to justice." Diane Cusick was a 23-year-old woman living with her parents in Nassau County, New York. She was separated from her husband and had moved in with her parents. She had a 3-year-old daughter from her prior marriage and had been working as a dance instructor. On February 15, 1968, Diane finished her job at a children's dance school and called her parents to tell them that she was going to the mall to purchase shoes. However, she never returned home. That night, when Diane failed to return to the house, her parents went out to look for her. They found her car, a 1961 Plymouth Valiant, in the parking lot of the Green Acres Mall in Valley Stream, New York. They opened the car door to find a horrifying sight. Their daughter was laying in the backseat of the car, dead. Her face was bloodied, and she had a 2-inch piece of tape around her mouth and neck. They immediately notified police. An autopsy determined that she had been beaten in the face and the head. Her cause of death was determined to be strangulation. She had defensive wounds on her hands, and police were able to collect DNA evidence at the scene. However, DNA testing did not exist in 1968. Police conducted a massive search of the area and showed Diane's photo to nearly 2,000 people, asking if they could provide any information about her last hours. Police were able to release a description of a suspect seen at a movie theater in the mall shortly before Diane's body was found. Witnesses said that the man was a white male in his late teens or early 20s, with average build. They claim he wore eyeglasses and was at least 5 foot 8 inches tall. Diane's estranged husband was ruled out as a suspect as he had an alibi. He was working his part-time job as a taxi driver at the time of the murder. Police questioned multiple people, but no leads could be found, and the case would eventually grow cold. In 2016, the DNA sample found at the crime scene was submitted to a national database, but no match could be found. Then, in 2021, police in Nassau County received a tip that a killer who was responsible for other killings in a suburban county, who was currently locked up in New Jersey, may also be responsible for Diane's murder. Police ran a DNA test again, and this time it matched the convicted serial killer, Richard Cottingham. Cottingham is now 76 years old and serving a life sentence for murdering nearly half a dozen women and girls in New Jersey and New York since the 1960s. He was arrested in 1980 after a motel employee heard the screams of a woman inside his room. Police were called and they found the woman alive but handcuffed and suffering from bite marks and knife wounds. Cottingham would later admit to killing more than 100 women. However, police have officially linked him to about a dozen killings. He was also nicknamed the Torso Killer because he was known for dismembering his victims. Police believe that Cottingham pretended to be a security guard or possibly a police officer, and that he accused Diane of stealing. He then asked her to come with him and overpowered her in a secluded area. Cottingham was working as a computer programmer for a health insurance company in New York at the time of the killings. In June of 2022, Cottingham was officially charged with Diane's murder. On December 5, 2022, Cottingham admitted to killing Diane Cusick and 4 other women decades ago. He was sentenced to 25 years to life behind bars for Diane's murder. However, he won't be prosecuted for the 4 other murders, as he is already spending the rest of his life in prison for prior murder convictions. Diane's daughter, Darlene Altman, now 58, said during a police conference, quote, "I never thought I'd see this day. I'd given up, but all these people got justice for me and my mother. The case was finally solved after 54 years. In 1993, Sherri Herrera, a mother of 4, was 30 years old. She lived in Tulare County in California. She was a known sex worker and had problems with drug addiction. However, she put her life in danger every day in order to support her kids. She often worked by the highway rest areas. It was March 30th, 1993, when Sherri's body was found about 400 miles from Tulare off of I-10 near an eastbound on-ramp to the 10 freeway near Desert Center in Riverside County, California. Her last seen moments were her being dropped off at a rest stop between Tulare and Pixley. According to a witness, she planned to be picked up 10 minutes later, but she was never seen alive again. Sherri's cause of death was strangulation with a belt, and she had also been sexually assaulted. Sherri's cause of death was strangulation with a belt, and she had also been sexually assaulted. Somehow, she had traveled or had been moved over 400 miles from her hometown with no explanation. DNA evidence was found among the items. However, stumped by the huge distance, with a lack of DNA technology and no suspects, the case went unsolved. Though local investigators at the time were unable to identify a suspect using the crime scene artifacts, they handled the case with care by properly packaging evidence and caring for it as the years passed and technology progressed. In 2002, investigator Mike Thompson of the Riverside County District Attorney's Office and a former member of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department Cold Case Unit, alongside Texas Ranger Danny Briley, worked together on the case. They decided to upload the DNA found to the database known as CODIS, and about 5 years later, a match was made. Although a match was made to DNA in CODIS, no name or identity was associated with the DNA sequence. The match was made in question with another case of a murdered prostitute named Shenda Hayes. Shenda Hayes was a woman who was found murdered and assaulted in April of 1992 in Titus County, Texas. Shenda Hayes was also working as an escort and had been strangled with a cord by what police call, quote, a device made of wire and cord in a manner to control the victim. It was believed that she was also sexually assaulted. Her body was then callously left by a rest area along Interstate 30 near Mount Pleasant in Titus County. While investigators now had a DNA match to 2 crime scenes, they still had no name to go along with that DNA sequence. In September of 2020, the Riverside Cold Case Unit began conducting forensic genealogy inquests into both the deaths of Sherri Herrera and the connected death of Shenda Hayes. The Texas Rangers had previously processed the evidence and derived and created a file based on a single nucleotide. This type of file is then able to be uploaded to public genealogical company databases, which process the results. The results are then compared to results sourced by DNA kits purchased by the general public, such as kits from 23andMe and Ancestry.com. Thompson said that, according to his investigatory notes, which he calls a, quote, family tree, there were 6 relatives who lived in or around Waco, Texas, who were in the right genetic range for a more direct comparison. A saliva swab was taken from the mouth of the narrowed-down suspect on April 26, 2022, and the DNA profile matched from both evidence taken from the crime scene of Sherri's death and from the crime scene of the murder and careless dumping of Shenda Hayes. Finally, in May of 2022, retired truck driver Douglas Thomas was arrested in Waco, Texas for the murder of Shenda Hayes and is being held on a $2 million bond. In June, Thompson reached out to a lead investigator in that case with a positive DNA match. Forensic genealogy was used to connect the DNA of Thomas to the crime scene of Sherri Herrera as well. In June of 2022, Thomas was charged with the murder of Sherri Herrera. Once the trial in Texas is complete, he will be brought to California to be prosecuted for her murder. Thomas had been driving cross-country for 4 decades, so investigators warn that his body count may be higher than we know. As the interstate routes are notoriously dangerous places for women to be without their own transportation or protection, numerous bodies of women, likely escorts or unhoused people, are found every year along the interstate routes. And due to the anonymous nature of the countless truck drivers and commuters traveling in and out of the area, very few cases are ever closed. In January of 2011, Bethany Ann Decker, 21, was struggling to come into adulthood. A native of Fredericksburg, Virginia, she had moved to the Washington area as a result of her marriage to Emil Decker. Together, the couple had a son, but her husband's frequent deployments to Afghanistan, often of indeterminate or agonizingly long durations, severely strained the marriage. Bethany became pregnant again near the end of 2010. She was struggling to stay faithful to an absent husband, and she eventually moved into her own apartment in Ashburn, Virginia, when she was 4 months along in her pregnancy. She left her son at her in-laws in Maryland and worked at a restaurant. She finished her coursework at George Mason University and was expected to graduate in May of 2011. She finished her coursework at George Mason University and was expected to graduate in May of 2011. While working at the restaurant, she had met Ronald Roldan, around 30 at the time, and became romantically involved with him. He soon moved into her new apartment and established himself as a controlling and possessive partner. He would regularly demand that Bethany send photos of herself from her cell phone so he could be sure she was not with anyone with whom he did not want her to associate. Bethany's parents had developed a plan to get her out of her situation, but they were never able to implement it. On January 29, 2011, she called the restaurant that she was working at from her apartment to check her schedule. This would be the last time that anyone heard from Bethany. Both her husband and Roldan claimed to have seen Bethany that day, but neither of the men's claims could be independently verified. When Bethany was not at the airport to see her husband off when he returned to Afghanistan, their friends assumed that the couple's marital problems had simply gotten worse over time. Their concerns became more urgent when, over the next few weeks, messages sent through Bethany's personal Facebook page, purportedly from Bethany herself, alarmed friends as they were not in the tone or written voice of Bethany. It would be revealed that her friends were in fact messaging with the killer himself, masquerading as the slain Bethany. In late February, 3 weeks after anyone who knew Bethany besides her husband and boyfriend, unreliable sources at the time, friends and family were alarmed enough to begin looking for her. Her grandparents drove by her apartment and noticed that her car was parked at an unusual angle and had a flat tire and was covered in dust. Bethany usually kept her car in far better shape, and this visual was so unlike her that they finally decided to report her missing. The investigation caused Bethany's husband to come back from Afghanistan early, and he cooperated fully with police. Roldan moved out of their shared apartment and told police that he merely thought Bethany had gone back to her husband, but he told different investigators different stories in regards to when he had last seen Bethany or her car, which was parked outside. It then turned out that he had an arrest history for minor offenses, including smashing a window. A search of the apartment and of the fields nearby failed to turn up anything which could support an arrest warrant, so Roldan was free to go and soon stopped cooperating with investigators. He was named a person of interest, but no concrete evidence was able to lead to an arrest. Roldan would remain in Northern Virginia until a subsequent girlfriend would try to escape his wrath by moving away to Pinehurst, North Carolina. Roldan would follow her there to continue his abuse. One night, they got into an argument which escalated to a physical struggle, during which Roldan menacingly informed her that he could, quote, make people disappear. He even fired a gun at his girlfriend, but she was able to jerk away from him enough that the bullet damaged her eye, and while she lost sight in one eye, police say that was a far better outcome than the bullet taking her life. Police arrested Roldan and charged him with attempted murder. His ex-girlfriend would later go on the American television talk show Dr. Phil to tell her harrowing story. Roldan was serving time for this assault while investigators continued looking into Bethany's death. A problem with the evidence recovered led prosecutors to drop the more serious charge of attempted murder in exchange for a guilty plea of 2 counts of assault. Prosecutors from Loudoun County had tried and failed while he was awaiting trial to get him to tell them something, anything about what had happened to Bethany. But Roldan invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and told police nothing. And investigators announced that he would be deported to Bolivia when he was released, as their hands were tied without further evidence. Because of the lack of evidence in Bethany's disappearance and the lack of a body ever found, while there was little doubt that Roldan was responsible for her disappearance, police wondered if there would ever be enough evidence to charge him. Even though he more or less admitted that he had killed before to his girlfriend during the gunfire which led to his prison sentence, many feared that after he finished his sentence on the assault, Roldan would simply be deported to his native Bolivia and in all likelihood never have to face justice. Prior to Roldan being released in 2020, Bethany's family feared that he would escape conviction, but Roldan was arrested on charges of abduction in Bethany's case as soon as his sentence ended. Prosecutors in Loudoun County got an indictment, although they have never disclosed what evidence they had. And almost 2 years later, Roldan has finally entered his recent plea of guilty. The evidence does not seem to include the recovery of Bethany's body, however, as no media reports indicate that her remains were located. Sentencing of Roldan is scheduled for February of 2023. However, prosecutors say that his plea of guilty might shorten the trial, a relief to both friends and family of Bethany. Her case was finally solved after over a decade. On June 9, 2022, the Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, alongside the Texas Attorney General's Office, announced that yet another case had been solved due to genetic genealogy. Holly Marie Clouse, who had last been seen by her family in early 1980 and was believed to be deceased, is in fact alive and well. The woman formerly known as Baby Holly Marie was found just over 40 years after her parents were brutally murdered in rural Houston, and she was deemed missing and endangered. Dean and Tina Clouse were last photographed with their infant daughter, Holly Marie, in 1980, shortly before all 3 mysteriously disappeared. Holly had not been seen since shortly after this photo was taken. A year later, Holly's parents, Dean and Tina, were found murdered in Houston on January 12, 1981. While the crime scene was processed, alarmingly, there was no sign of the couple's infant, a baby girl. The baby's father, Dean, was beaten to death, while her mother, Tina, was strangled. Due to a lack of IDs, the couple's identification, using advanced DNA techniques, was delayed until 2021. Assisted by agencies in 3 states, a search for records of their child, who was born Holly Marie Clouse, by Texas investigators resulted in a surprising discovery, a rarity when compared to the many missing and exploited children never recovered. Holly Marie Clouse is now a mother of 5, living in Oklahoma. It is fitting that investigators came to Holly's place of employment to make the positive identification in person on June 7th, which would have been her father, Dean's, 63rd birthday. Just hours after, the Oklahoma mother of 5 was able to be reunited online with family from both sides. In an effort to help locate Holly after her parents were finally identified, the Hope for Holly DNA project, launched in her honor, became the custodian of the genetic profiles of several of Holly's family members. Detectives believe Holly's disappearance is linked to a religious organization that some say has cult-like characteristics. 2 women, identified only as religious nomadic women, say that they brought Holly to the church, according to Brent Webster, an investigator with the Texas Attorney General's cold case and missing persons unit. The detective goes on to say, quote, "They were wearing white robes, and they were barefoot. They indicated the beliefs of their religion included the separation of male and female members." That information rang some bells for Rick Allen Ross, a world-renowned expert on cults and their recruitment behaviors. Ross said that the description of the women's dress sounded highly similar to the Christ family. No further details have been given, although there is some talk that Holly was given up prior to the murders, as some media outlets say she was found at a church a year prior to her parents' death. However, no further details are given, as police say due to the sensitive nature of the ongoing investigation, they are not able to provide more information. While questions remain as to how Holly was able to go missing and remain undetected, she is alive and well, and to her remaining family on both her mother and father's side, this is the best resolution they could have hoped for. Her missing persons case was closed after over 4 decades.
Marise Ann Chiverella was a 9-year-old girl living with her parents in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. On March 18, 1964, Marisa left her home alone for her school at around 8 p.m. She was a 3rd grader at the St. Joseph's Parochial School, and the school was only 10 minutes walk from her home. She used to go with her siblings, but on this day, she had decided to go alone as she wanted to get to school early. She wanted to deliver cans of pears and beets to her teacher for her teacher's feast day. However, she never made it. She was last seen alive at around 8:10 a.m. walking east on West 4th Street. At around 1 p.m. on the same day, a man was giving his 16-year-old nephew driving lessons near an abandoned strip mine when he noticed what appeared to be a large doll on top of a garbage pile. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was the body of a small girl. He immediately notified police. The body was later confirmed to be Marise Ann Chiverella. Her body had been found 2 miles away from her home. Her hands and feet had been tied with her own shoelaces. An autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Her clothes and the canned foods were found at the crime scene. Police questioned family and friends. They also interviewed a priest who had been suspected in a murder of another girl in Bristol, Pennsylvania, and a local exhibitionist who committed suicide shortly after he was asked to give a polygraph test. Police interviewed numerous suspects over the years, but none were ever charged. The case would eventually go cold. In 2007, DNA sample found at the crime scene was submitted to the Pennsylvania State Laboratory and a suspect's DNA profile was made. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, but no matches could be found. In 2018, with the help of Parabon Nanolabs, a forensic sketch of the potential suspect was made using the DNA found at the crime scene. The photo showed how the suspect may have looked like at the age of 25, 40, and 60. The police released the photos to the general public, hoping to find any leads, but to no avail. Then, in 2019, the DNA sample was entered into genealogy databases and found a match to a very distant relative of the suspect. However, the investigators had no idea about the suspect's identity. Then, in 2020, genealogist Eric Schubert, an 18-year-old college student, reached out to the police and offered his help free of charge. Eric had a special set of skills of drawing and tracing family trees to find matches. He had previously helped police in several cases. The police agreed and Eric got to work. The next few months, Eric worked tirelessly and provided names of relatives who were scattered throughout the country. The police collected DNA from the relatives and matched it with the DNA found at the crime scene. Soon, they zeroed in on a local bartender named James Fort. However, they found out that Fort had died in 1980 at the age of 38. In January 2022, his body was exhumed and a DNA sample was taken. On February 3, 2022, a DNA test confirmed his DNA matched to the DNA found at the crime scene. At the time of the murder, Fort was 22 years old and lived 6 to 7 blocks away from Marissa. Fort worked as a bartender and bar supply salesman in Hazleton. He was never married and had no children. Fort was arrested for sexual assault in an unrelated crime in 1974, 10 years after Marissa's murder. However, he was given a plea bargain for aggravated assault and sentenced to 1 year on probation. 4 years later, he was again arrested and charged with reckless endangering another person and harassment. Police said they have no further details about this arrest. Fort died in 1980 of natural causes, possibly a heart attack in the bar he worked. Marissa's siblings thanked the investigators and Eric for solving the case and bringing some form of closure to the family. Wazir Pasha was a 35-year-old man living with his wife in Gajananagar, Bengaluru, India. In early May 2015, Pasha's wife reported him missing after he failed to return home after work. On May 16, 2015, a body would be found in Sumandapalli, Anantapur, Andhra Pradesh. Police were unable to identify him as there was no identification on him. With little to no leads, both cases remained unsolved for next few years. Then, in 2022, Deputy Commissioner of Police came across the missing person case of Wazir Pasha and ordered a fresh probe into the case. The police questioned friends and relatives. They also decided to go through Pasha's phone records and found that the last call Pasha had received was from one of his distant relatives, Hina Kausar. Police decided to question her. However, they soon learned that Hina and her husband, Mohammad Ghosh, had also not been seen since 2015. The police tried to locate them, but there was no trace of them. Finding it suspicious, the police decided to put the couple's family under surveillance. On February 11, 2022, Hina's grandfather died. Police went to their house in civilian clothes, hoping the couple would show up for the funeral. Fortunately, Hina and Ghosh showed up and were immediately detained for questioning. During the interview, the couple admitted to murdering Pasha. They told police that the couple had gotten married in 2012 and moved to Bengaluru. They had been working as a tailor at their house. They stitched clothes and supplied clothes to the garment factories, but the business did not do well and they had incurred heavy losses. The couple took a loan from a Maulvi but were unable to pay it back. So they decided to move to Hyderabad. However, the Maulvi found out about their location and demanded they pay him back the money. The couple then returned back to Bengaluru. Wazir Pasha reportedly decided to help the couple, but in exchange, he wanted to sleep with Hina. Hina initially refused, but with the mounting debt on their heads, she eventually agreed. She later told her husband, who got extremely angry and decided to kill Pasha. The couple devised a plan to murder him. On May 13, 2015, Hina called Pasha over. When Pasha entered Hina's house, Ghosh came out of hiding and the couple strangled Pasha with Hina's sari. They then dismembered his body and put it in 2 sacks filled with clothes. They then dumped his body in a drainage near Sumandipalli, Anantapur. The couple then moved to Anantapur the same day. Police realized the unidentified body found in Sumandipalli could be Pasha. They sent the DNA samples collected from the unidentified body along with the DNA from Pasha's relatives for testing. A DNA test confirmed that the body was indeed of Wazir Pasha. The case was solved after 7 years. On June 3, 1993, a truck driver discovered a body of a woman on westbound Pacheco Pass Highway in Gilroy, California, after he had stopped to relieve himself. He immediately notified police. A coroner reported her cause of death as undetermined. At the time, the woman was wearing blue clothing and had no identification on her. Police tried everything to identify her, but with no luck. The police referred to her as Blue Pacheco, and she was buried in a local cemetery. A year later, a newspaper in Oregon started receiving letters confessing to murdering 5 people throughout West Coast. The newspaper ran a 5-part series with the name Happy Face Serial Killer, as the letter writer signed the letter with a smiley face. At the time, there were 4 or 5 unsolved murders in the area. A year later, Keith Hunter Jesperson was identified as the letter writer. He confessed to murdering several people. However, authorities linked him to 8 female murders between 1990 and 1985. He also wrote a letter to the Santa Clara County District Attorney in 2006 admitting to sexually assaulting and killing a female on Pacheco Pass Highway. However, he said that he did not know the woman's identity. In 2007, Jesperson pled guilty to killing the unknown woman, later referred to as Blue Pacheco. He told police he met the woman at a truck stop on Interstate 5 in Corning, California, and gave her a ride. He said he had sex with her before strangling her to death. He then rode towards Gilroy and dumped her body at the Pacheco Pass on Highway 152. He told police she had told him she had family in Sacramento, California. However, he did not know her name. Jesperson was sentenced to life in prison for multiple homicides, with no possibility of a parole. Even though the woman's killer was behind bars, police had no idea about the victim's identity. In 2019, police reopened the case and contacted DNA Doe Project for their help in identifying the victim. The DNA Doe Project used genetic genealogy to create a DNA profile of the victim and entered it into the GED match. On April 13, 2022, detectives identified Blue Pacheco as Patricia Skipple, known to her family as Patsy. Patricia was a mother and a long-time resident of Colton, Oregon. Patricia was 45 years old at the time of her death. No other information has been released to the public. The case was solved after 29 years.